What if some of the species that science has officially declared extinct never actually disappeared? And there's footage sitting in an archive somewhere that proves it. Over the last 100 years, hunters, park rangers, fishermen, and ordinary people with cheap cameras have claimed to capture something that shouldn't exist. An animal the textbooks say is gone. Blurry photographs, grainy film reels, a few seconds of shaky video, usually filmed by someone who wasn't even trying to make history. Most of it gets dismissed in minutes. Some of it has kept scientists arguing for decades. We're counting down the 10 most debated pieces of proof that extinction isn't always final. From the easiest case to dismiss to the one that has never been fully explained. And we're saving the most unsettling footage on this list for last. Once you see it, you'll understand why some researchers still won't rule it out. Number 10. The Great Auk. Picture the cliffs of Elde, a volcanic island off the coast of Iceland, June 1844. Two fishermen corner the last confirmed breeding pair on a ledge of black rock. One egg lies between them, already cracked underfoot. Within minutes, both birds are dead, and a species that once numbered in the millions across the North Atlantic is, officially, gone. The great auk stood about waist-high on an adult human, roughly the size of a large goose but built like a flightless torpedo, black and white, upright, so similar to the birds we now call penguins that it actually lent them the name. It couldn't fly, so once boats and rifles arrived, it had nowhere left to hide. For decades after 1844, fishermen along the coasts of Newfoundland and northern Scotland reported glimpses of large black and white birds diving near their hulls. A handful of amateur photographic plates from the 1860s and 1880s surfaced in private collections, allegedly showing the bird alive decades after its official death. Here's the catch. Not one of those images has ever been authenticated. Ornithologists who've studied the surviving plates point out that cormorants and razorbills share almost the same silhouette from a distance, and 19th-century photography made misidentification almost guaranteed. Still, the sightings never fully stopped. They just got rarer and rarer until they became stories nobody could verify anymore. So we start with a bird that vanished in broad daylight, in front of two named witnesses, and still left the door open a crack. If an ending this documented could leave room for doubt, imagine what happens with a species that disappeared without anyone watching at all. Number 9. The Caribbean monk seal. The last confirmed sighting came in 1952, a small colony hauled out on Serenilla Bank, a scatter of reef and sand between Jamaica and Nicaragua. After that, nothing official. No births recorded, no bodies found, no scientific expedition turning up a single animal. In 2008, after a 5-year review, the United States government made it formal. The Caribbean monk seal was extinct. You have to picture an animal built like a couch cushion with flippers, around 8 feet long, 200 pounds. A thick, gray-brown body made for lounging on isolated cays where nothing had ever hunted it before humans showed up with harpoons for its blubber. That, therefore, was the seal's undoing. It had evolved with no fear of predators, so it simply didn't run. Whalers and fishermen wiped out entire colonies in a matter of seasons. Here's where it gets strange. Between the 1970s and the early 2000s, divers and fishermen off Haiti, Jamaica, and the Yucatan repeatedly reported thick gray seals resting on remote reefs, and at least 2 photographs, passed hand to hand through diving communities, claimed to show one basking on a rock, decades after the species was supposedly gone, but neither photograph has ever produced a usable original, a location, or a second confirming frame. NOAA's own extinction review considered these reports directly and still concluded the species was gone, most likely misidentifications of hooded seals or vagrant Mediterranean monk seals blown wildly off course. A conclusion, not a certainty. We move from an animal nobody can find on camera to one that was caught on film, repeatedly, right up until the day it vanished for good. Number 8. The Carolina parakeet. The last known individual, a bird zookeepers named Incas, died in a cage at the Cincinnati Zoo in February 1918, in the very same building where the last passenger pigeon had died 4 years earlier. Before that, though, the Carolina parakeet was common enough across the southeastern United States that farmers considered it a pest. Picture a bird a little larger than a mourning dove but impossible to miss, a lime-green body, a bright yellow head, and an orange face, flying in screeching flocks that could strip an orchard bare in an afternoon. So farmers shot them by the hundreds, and milliners bought the feathers by the pound for women's hats, a combination of persecution and fashion that therefore collapsed the population within a single human lifetime. Here's the twist. A photograph circulated among ornithology students in the 1930s, allegedly taken in a South Carolina swamp, shows green birds with yellow heads perched in cypress branches, more than a decade after the species was declared gone. Still, no peer-reviewed source has ever traced that photograph to a negative, a photographer, or a precise location, and experts note how easily the image could show feral monk parakeets, an unrelated species already establishing itself in the American South by that decade. Convenient, unconfirmed, and never fully closed. If a bird that vanished from a zoo cage in front of keepers can still generate disputed photographs, what happens with a species whose extinction was witnessed by millions in real time? Number 7. The passenger pigeon. On September 1, 1914, a pigeon named Martha died in her enclosure at the Cincinnati Zoo. Her body was packed in ice and shipped to the Smithsonian. Her photograph, sitting quietly, almost bored, is one of the most reproduced wildlife images in American history, and it marks officially the extinction of the passenger pigeon. We've all heard the numbers. Flocks so vast they blotted out the sun for hours. An estimated 3 to 5 billion birds at the species peak, more than every bird in North America combined today. And then, in barely 40 years, 0. Market hunters shot them by the railcar load for city restaurants. And because passenger pigeons only bred successfully in enormous colonies, the population collapsed the moment it fell below a critical mass. So even the birds that survived the guns couldn't reproduce their way back. Here's the catch. A photograph attributed to a Wisconsin naturalist, dated somewhere between 1907 and 1910, appears to show a small wild flock in flight. Years after ornithologists agreed the species had already vanished from the wild, with only zoo birds like Martha left. Most historians who've examined it now believe the photograph was either misdated, mislabeled, or shows a flock of mourning doves photographed at a distance that flattens the difference. But most isn't all, and the original negative was lost before anyone could run a definitive analysis. From a bird whose extinction was documented almost too well, we move to a big cat whose ending was documented mostly through hunting trophies, which is exactly the problem. Number 6. The Bali tiger. The last confirmed kill happened in West Bali in 1937, a female shot near Sumbar Kema. No systematic survey followed. By the 1940s and 50s, colonial hunting records simply stopped mentioning the subspecies at all, and biologists eventually accepted that the Bali tiger, the smallest tiger that ever lived, was gone. Picture a cat roughly the size of a large German shepherd, maybe 200 pounds at most. Its stripes narrower and more densely packed than any other tigers. An entire subspecies confined to an island smaller than the state of Delaware. Therefore, it never stood a chance. No reserves, no protected forest, and a colonial bounty system that rewarded hunters for every animal killed, so the population had nowhere to retreat to, and no incentive protecting it. Here's where it gets strange. A set of photographs from the late 1940s, taken by a Dutch plantation manager, shows a striped animal in a wire trap, captioned at the time as a living Bali tiger, caught roughly a decade after the subspecies was believed extinct. But wildlife historians who've re-examined the prints note the fur pattern is at least as consistent with a young Javan tiger cub, and the original location was never verified against any plantation record. A caption from 80 years ago, in other words, is not the same thing as proof. Which brings us, fittingly, to the Bali tiger's closest and equally doomed relative, one whose disappearing act was caught on film with slightly more to go on. Number 5. The Javan tiger. In 1972, a forestry officer patrolling the Meru Batiri Reserve on Java reported fresh paw prints crossing a riverbank at dusk, and, seconds later, a blurred photograph of a striped shape vanishing into the undergrowth. Indonesian biologists collected plaster casts of the tracks that same week. It's still considered the single strongest piece of physical evidence for the Javan tiger's survival, past the point most records assumed it was already gone. You're looking at an animal close to the size of a very large domestic dog, but built entirely differently. Dense muscle packed onto a low frame, roughly 200 pounds, stripes set closer together than any tiger you've likely seen in a zoo. So as Java's human population exploded through the 20th century, rice paddies swallowed the forest the tiger depended on, and pesticide runoff quietly poisoned the deer and wild pig populations it hunted. Habitat loss and starvation working together, rather than hunting alone. Here's the twist. Hair samples collected alongside those 1972 tracks were analyzed in a lab, and the photograph itself, while blurred, showed proportions biologists considered consistent with a tiger rather than a leopard or wild dog. Still, the hair analysis came back inconclusive by the standards of the time, and no photograph or track has been confirmed since. Not in 1979, not in 1990, not ever. The Javan tiger was formally declared extinct by international conservation authorities in 1994. But that 1972 print remains to this day the case most tiger biologists admit they can't fully dismiss. If a tiger can leave behind analyzed hair samples and photographed tracks and still vanish from the record, picture what happens to one whose entire habitat sat on the wrong side of a closed international border. Number 4. The Caspian tiger. Soviet border patrols along the frontier with Turkey and Iran logged the last confirmed encounters through the 1950s and 60s, and by 1970, the sightings had simply stopped. The Caspian tiger, once found from Turkey to western China, was declared extinct across its entire range within a few years of that final report. This wasn't a small cat. Adult males could stretch close to 9 feet from nose to tail and weigh over 400 pounds. Roughly the length of a small hatchback car, making it one of the largest tigers that has ever existed. Soviet agricultural planners drained the wetlands along the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers to grow cotton, therefore destroying the reed thickets the tiger used for cover, while organized extermination campaigns targeted the animal directly as a threat to livestock. Here's where it gets strange. A set of grainy black and white photographs reportedly captured by a border patrol camera sometime in the 1970s circulated among Iranian wildlife officials as possible evidence of a late surviving population clinging on in the mountains, straddling the two countries. But no chain of custody for those photographs has ever been established, and in 2009 a genetic study confirmed something almost as strange as a survival story. The Caspian tiger was nearly identical, DNA for DNA, to the Siberian tiger living today. That finding is now driving real reintroduction plans using Siberian tigers to repopulate parts of the old Caspian range. Proof, perhaps, that the tiger itself was never truly unique enough to hide, even if the photographs were fabricated or simply misattributed animals smuggled across a border. Every case so far involves an animal shot, trapped, or driven out by human hands directly. Our next case is different. A species whose extinction was caused by something far less dramatic than a rifle, a dam. Number 3. The baiji. In late 2006, a 6-week international expedition swept nearly the entire length of the Yangtze River, searching for the baiji, or Chinese river dolphin, using hydrophones and visual survey teams, led by Swiss biologist August Pfluger and Chinese researcher Wang Ding. They found zero. The species was declared functionally extinct, the first cetacean wiped out by human activity in modern history. Picture a dolphin nearly 8 feet long, pale gray-white, with a long, narrow snout and eyes so reduced from millions of years in murky water that it navigated almost entirely by sound, like a whale-sized creature feeling its way through fog. 3 gorges dam construction fragmented its habitat. Cargo ship propellers sliced through its territory around the clock, and industrial pollution poisoned the water it depended on. So by the time anyone organized a serious rescue effort, there was barely a population left to save. Here's the twist that made headlines around the world. In August 2007, just months after the extinction declaration, a Chinese businessman named Zheng Yujiang filmed a large pale creature swimming near Tongling in Anhui province. The footage spread instantly. Newspapers ran the story as baiji not extinct after all. Researchers at the Institute of Hydrobiology in Wuhan reviewed the video frame by frame and concluded the movement pattern and coloring were more consistent with a finless porpoise, a smaller relative still present in the river, not the baiji. No confirmed sighting has followed in the years since. But the video exists, was filmed by a credible witness with no history of hoaxing, and remains the closest thing to a post-extinction recording that any cetacean has ever produced. If a river dolphin can generate real video footage after its funeral, imagine what happens when the species in question is a bird, small enough to hide, and famous enough that an entire country went looking for it. Number 2. The ivory-billed woodpecker. April 2004, Bayou de View, deep inside the Cache River National Wildlife Refuge in Arkansas. A kayaker named Gene Sparling reports glimpsing an enormous woodpecker with a startling amount of white on its wings. Days later, searcher David Luneau captures 4 seconds of blurred video showing a large bird flushing from a tree, footage that would trigger one of the largest wildlife searches in American history. You're talking about the largest woodpecker in North America, close to 20 inches long with a wingspan rivaling a red-tailed hawk, jet black with a striking white trailing edge on its wings. A bird so distinctive, its nickname among old hunters was the Lord God bird, because that was supposedly what people shouted the first time they saw one. Old-growth bottomland forest across the southeast had been logged almost to nothing by the mid-20th century, and therefore the beetle larvae the woodpecker relied on, found only in large dying trees, disappeared right along with it. By 1944, the last widely accepted sighting had come and gone, so when the Cornell Lab of Ornithology announced the bird's rediscovery in the journal Science in 2005, based on Luneau's video and more than a dozen additional reports, it was treated as one of the great conservation comebacks of the century. A $10 million search and recovery effort followed almost immediately. But not everyone agreed. Ornithologist Jerome Jackson and other reviewers argued the blurred video matched a startled pileated woodpecker, a common look-alike species, frame for frame. The debate never fully resolved, and when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service moved to officially declare the species extinct in 2021, fresh, unverified drone footage from Louisiana surfaced just in time to delay that decision again in 2023. As of now, the ivory-billed woodpecker remains suspended in bureaucratic limbo, neither confirmed alive nor officially dead. And that brings us to the case that has outlasted every other animal on this list, the one still generating new footage today, in your lifetime, not a century ago. Number 1. The thylacine. On September 7, 1936, an animal known only as Benjamin died alone in a concrete enclosure at Hobart Zoo in Tasmania, just 59 days after the Tasmanian government finally granted the species legal protection. Too late, of course. The thylacine, the largest carnivorous marsupial of modern times, was gone. Picture something built like no predator alive today, roughly the size of a medium dog, close to 6 feet from nose to the tip of a stiff kangaroo-like tail, with dark stripes running across its lower back and a jaw that could gape open nearly twice as wide as a wolf's. Between 1888 and 1909 alone, the Tasmanian government paid out over 2,000 bounties for dead thylacines, so hunting pressure, combined with habitat clearing and a mysterious disease outbreak, pushed a species that had survived tens of thousands of years into oblivion within a few decades. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Since Benjamin's death, more than 8,000 reported sightings have been logged across Tasmania and mainland Australia, and dozens of them come with photographs or film. Home movies from the 1970s, trail camera stills from remote national parks, and most recently, handheld footage from the last few years, shared online and picked apart frame by biologists and skeptics alike, showing a low, striped, dog-sized shape moving through scrub at dusk. Researchers at the University of Tasmania and international teams now working on thylacine de-extinction using preserved genetic material admit something uncomfortable. Not one piece of footage has ever survived rigorous scrutiny. Most turn out to be foxes, wild dogs, or quolls with mange distorting their coats. And still, the volume, the consistency, and the occasional quality of these recordings have kept the case alive for 90 years in a way no myth or legend ever could, because this isn't folklore. It's a species we know, for a fact, existed, hunted with a government bounty, filmed on newsreels while alive, and that keeps almost showing up again. We've spent this entire countdown chasing the same question in 10 different disguises. What does it actually take for an image to prove that something is still alive? A blurry photograph never quite settles it. Neither does a 4-second video, or a single hair sample, or a set of tracks in the mud. Each case on this list sits in the same uncomfortable middle ground. Not enough evidence to declare a comeback, but never quite little enough to close the file for good. Maybe that says less about these animals than it does about us. Extinction is a line drawn by committees and review boards, updated whenever new data arrives, and every blurry frame on this list is really a record of how badly we want that line to be wrong. So the next time you see a grainy video claiming to show something that shouldn't exist anymore, ask yourself what you're really looking for in it. Proof the animal survived, or proof that loss itself isn't as permanent as it looks. If you want to keep questioning what counts as evidence, there's a video in this same series breaking down the creatures cryptozoologists are still hunting for right now, the ones science never even confirmed existed in the first place. Subscribe if you want to be there when we get to it.